have a handout here, and if you're at home and you're watching, we're getting a little delay here. I apologize for that, so I'm just going to make sure it's visible. But what you could do is go to lgccteachingandlearning.com, click on workshops. At the very bottom of the page, you'll see a handout for workshop 11, which is today's. So I just wanted to get together to have a conversation. I'm glad we have two key players from DE and ISP. It's great, and I've taught face-to-face, so we kind of have it covered. And then those of you online, if you want to identify what you teach or your interests or concerns, you can add them to the list. So my idea was we just have a conversation based on the three modalities and discuss some of the issues that come up. There are some conversations right now through our CDC OEI grant. Trevor Thomas is involved in that, as am I. And one of the conversations is about training for faculty. And we're very aware of the need to offer the ETW, the Excellence in Teaching Workshop, the online Excellence in Teaching Workshop, OETW, and then there's an advanced OETW. And how these work is, if you've taught for us 24 units, then you are eligible to apply to participate in our ETW, and then upon successful completion, there's a few other things you'll find in Article 6 of the contract. I believe the dean will evaluate you, and there's some other things in there. Upon successful completion of all those components, you then move to Associate Level 1, which is certainly a pay bump and a ranking bump. Upon another 12 hours of completion of units, you then move to Associate Level 2. Trev and I have been having conversations through our grant work about what training is going to look like going forward. I actually have a meeting with Michelle Risden today to talk about some of this. So I'm hoping that this will serve a few purposes. One is to get a sense of what kind of trainings we could do for all these modalities in the future. We have a tentative date. It's not official, but we're planning, I believe, a DE symposium in March. I'm not going to announce the date yet because we're actually meeting today to talk about some of that. So I think we're very on track with offering really our last symposium we did, which was facilitated through one of the state groups, it was the @ONE group. I thought it was wonderful. We had great participation. Maybe some of you online participated, and we also had participation from many people locally. So I think we're in really good shape with DE. ISP, I think one of the proposals I want to make about this is, because we offer a face-to-face excellence in teaching and an online excellence in teaching, wouldn't it make sense to have an ISP, basically an it would be ISP ETW. Maybe there's too many letters there. But we all know that based on teaching those modalities, Miguel, you know this very well, when you're working with faculty, when you're working with the institutions, it's a totally different kind of situation teaching an ISP than face-to-face. And Treble will I think, offer that teaching DE, you deal with issues that you don't in a face-to-face classroom. So I think if we can think of these, not that you can't apply a great teaching technique to one modality and the next, but I think maybe for some of our trainings and conversations, we could begin to think about how each of these is unique. And then we're just talking about budgetary issues before we started here. How are things going in terms of departments? Do they feel like they have everything they need to offer excellent ISP classes, right? And I know most of that is correspondence, one-on-one enhanced correspondence, but there are a few faculty in the math department and a few other areas that either do instruction or tutoring. But I think as we're coming up on our budget cycles, we need to think in all of these areas. Trevor and I have had conversations about opportunities to make your lives easier with some of the new, I would say really bells and whistles technologies out there that can make Canvas an even more exciting learning environment. And then of course with face-to-face instruction, we're always thinking about, do we have the right classrooms? Do we have the equipment we need? The whole remodel for the science and art labs is focused really a lot on that dynamic of making sure the classroom and lab spaces are going to work for the faculty teaching in those class discipline areas. But let me jump to, we have Miguel and Trevor here, and then I will look online, and I should be getting a feed here. There are two of you watching, I'm just not seeing any comments. So if you want to add comments, go to the right-hand side of YouTube and type something in. We're watching the feed here. There's a bit of a delay, but I'll try to catch those comments. So I don't know, Miguel or Trevor, you both represent ISP, DE. I know Trevor, you've taught in face-to-face as well. So, but
ISP once.
ISP once, yeah. So many of us have taught in all modalities. where would you start this conversation? Your experiences working with faculty, teaching, what are some things that we need to have on this list to know what are the key issues for each type of teaching?
Just when I see, it talks about the common, key foundations.
Yeah.
And I think for all women, when I taught the ISP course just the once in the summer session, was that, and DE, we talk about on DE about humanizing. I mean, you obviously in a face-to-face class were physically in the same space, and so it's, that kind of human element or that connection with your students is important always. And so, we do strive, the work that we do in distance education to try to do that. And then I also found myself in the ISP in regards to my introduction letter, letting them to get to know me as an instructor, as a, like I said, I'm a human being also. I'm here to support your learning, and then always trying to, again, in all three modalities of providing those teachable moments and that meaningful feedback. And I found with the ISP program trying to with every time I return a packet, I would kind of have a memo kind of covering generally what I saw, overall with the performance of the assignments. So maybe when one student, because it's hard to, I would try to type it up because you have all those packets coming in, and but I would try to say, here's things that I saw that apply, and then I would try to provide an extra, some type of other element to my response of they were writing up case reviews, and so I would then try to provide some additional learning materials to them to say, hey, this is great stuff, but it was just really trying to again make that connection, making it meaningful for the student. And I know that with ISP, it was the first time I'd ever done it, so I just really didn't know. Again, I didn't know what to do. I just kind of went on my instinct of what I thought might work, but again, getting more additional training on best practices and how can we really better facilitate that and connect with all of our students in every different modality in the area that we're teaching.
Yeah, no, that's really great. So if you're watching at home, I just kind of drew across here. But humanizing, we want to humanize every classroom regardless of the three types of modalities. And then, like you said, there's teachable moments and feedback systems. And I think what I'm struck by, having taught in these three different modes, is that, there's like a difference in, I would almost say like time, it's like face-to-face, because, you meet with a student in a classroom, unless they're absent, you can, after class or maybe in your office hours later that day or later that week, have a conversation and say, hey, I know you're struggling with this. And so you can almost nip things in the bud pretty quickly. DE, as we know, and I've dealt with this primarily on the student behavior side of things. I've had people in the past where they were working on the weekend and maybe I wasn't, grading on Sunday. I didn't check. At the time it was probably Etudes or Canvas or Learning Management System. But then before I knew it, it was Monday and there was like a fight going because one student attacked another student, and so I had to quickly intervene, because there was that time in between the incident. And then in ISP, of course, we have, we were just talking, Miguel was just saying about the mail, Mondays and Fridays, mail comes in, goes out. And unless you're Bruce or Wynn or a few other faculty, maybe some counseling faculty, going in, directly having that one-on-one, which is really important, there is a time lag that goes in between stuff, and some of this is outside the control of the staff, of the faculty, and I think we've been really good about adapting, and we've had meetings, steering committee meetings once a quarter that Sheen runs or Tori, and I think we're all aware if we teach on ISP, that's pretty unique, just that there's a time lag. Now, the solution to that is, you teach in person, which is a time commitment. I'm, having to spend the night somewhere in Susanville. The second solution, which I've talked to Shane about, which could be interesting, is if we ever get Chromebooks, some computer system that can be locked down and that can't be hacked and that they can't access, outside. If we had our own network, right, we could all record videos, and then we could even do, let's say, within a span of a couple of days, because it's not, just to do a quick video like this on YouTube, it's almost instant. It doesn't have to be bells and whistles. And so imagine if we had that kind of feedback, and then we could provide that. Now, that is dependent on Department of Corrections. That's dependent on technology, maybe a grant. But I really like that idea, because to me, it's different the first time you teach ISP, and even the second time you teach it, because there is that lag, and sometimes you tell a student, oh, please improve on this, but then I've had a few students in the past who work ahead, And so they will maybe turn in module 1 and they'll say, oh, your answers aren't quite right. Can you please go back to module 1, read my expectations? But then they send in modules 2 and 3. And so then I'm in a situation like, okay, do I have, send those back and have the student redo it or whatever? So that time lag, I think, is kind of interesting just in terms of giving good feedback and as you're saying, that humanizing element. So
I think that's why ultimately that lag
Yeah.
just really makes
Yeah.
ISP that much
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
Like you said, if it was more, relatively real time, if you had some kind of computer access, something like that, at least it takes on maybe more of the
Yeah.
structure of an online course where
Yeah.
you're allowed. And I know that there
Yeah.
are some stuff being looked at, and like lower security, some of the juvenile program right now that I know Shane's working on to just low security,
Yeah.
maybe internet. I mean, so there's some stuff happening, but that would really truly be. But what do we do? The issue then is kind of like, that takes a lot of
Yeah.
time. You're working with several different agencies with their own bureaucracy, and so I guess it is, what do we do in the meantime? Because we
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
We've got real things and real time things, and how can we address just the best
Yeah.
practice at this point? And maybe we're doing all we can, but
Yeah. I would almost add that I put time on here and I put external forces because doing all the interviews I have with the ISP staff or some of the training videos and just working closely, as an instructor, I appreciate so much in that program how they are impacted, we are impacted by those external forces, those bureaucracies. DE, sure, like when we made the transition, as Trevor knows, when we switched from our LMS at to Canvas, that was crazy. Meetings and conversations about budget. But once we got that in place, I feel like Canvas is amazing. I give it a very high A in just in terms of use and function. Now, of course, something could happen. Canvas, the company, I think, just was bought out and they just went public, and I'm always worried like when that happens, if the price is going to go up. But for the most part, with DE, unless some regulation comes down or the Chancellor's Office says, kind of like AB 705, which those of you following this is the requirement to, if you talk to our math and English faculty, kind of push people through quickly through those basic skills classes and not give them the remediation that they might need. So something could always happen with DE or face-to-face, like 705. But I feel like ISP is under the most pressure because we can't just go to the Department of Corrections and say, it's going to be this way. And they will tell you stories about sometimes, maybe students don't get their work and it's not the fault of the faculty or the office, it's people and situations outside of your control. So do you have any thoughts on that? Just how you guys deal with the craziness of it?
For example, one thing that happens in the ISP program is like lockdowns.
Yeah, lockdowns.
And that basically means students don't have access to turn in work or be receiving work at that time. And lockdowns can happen randomly as well. So we're never really sure when they're going to come up or not. And that's just another external force that you're talking about. That's a lot different than face-to-face and distance education. Because during those lockdowns, that's kind of, we're relying on CDCR staff to just let us know when it's an acceptable time for us to be sending work back and stuff like that. And that's something that's not seen in face-to-face and distance education. ISP has a lot of another thing too that we were talking about earlier, the mail. Sometimes we'll be doing our part in the office, but CDC will lag on getting the mail out right to students and stuff like that. So those are things that are beyond our control, and it'd be nice to talk about or find solutions to those problems for sure.
I've often thought we need and Trevor, you can speak to this, I think with Canvas outages, not terrible, right?
No, they're
pretty
relatively normally really rare. Sometimes there's also
we have passport outages.
Right, maybe our website's down, but Canvas has been. I could look at some of their. They post everything and all the statistics on that. It's very rare, and then sometimes it'll just be a certain segment, like a certain area. It's not always where their entire Canvas goes down. It could just be a region that's having to some kind of logging or lags or something like that. But they really have
pretty good.
Since we've been with them, I don't even think we're a big was actually Canvas's fault that we couldn't get to their, unless it was like there was one time I think when the internet went down completely.
A line that got cut in the Bay Area.
Yeah, or something like that. But Canvas is, with their cloud, storage, they are they've been very reliable with their product.
Well, and I was asking it because I'm thinking so if you have a face-to-face class and the college and there's a snow day, I don't know a single faculty member, like if you had an exam that day, who would say, no, you get a 0. And I just hope, and I guess I'd ask both of you, do you think for faculty in DE, if there is an outage or some technological issue, or there's a mail or lockdown with ISP, are we doing a good enough job? Or are people generally, because I 100% of the time, if there's a lockdown, I'm like, you guys document it to me, yeah, you can do a makeup. I've done that with final exams. But across the board, would you say do most faculty follow that if there's like a legitimate outage or mail issue lockdown?
In the ISP program, most faculty have been pretty receptive to those issues. As long as we can provide them some kind of documentation from like a coordinator at one of the prisons that says they were on lockdown, or we recently had an issue where like a student got hit in the head.
Oh wow!
And so it was a medical thing, but he provided documentation. Mm-hmm. This is why I wasn't able to submit my work on time and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's
as long as we get documentation and stuff like that, like faculty usually is pretty accommodating to that.
I know we've had, I was going to say some concerns just if then that leads to the faculty member having to teach, let's say, later in the summer and she is on vacation or something.
Definitely, that can be an issue. For example, I've personally in the office had to reach out to instructors that taught in the previous quarter, but they're not teaching at the moment. And sometimes it has been hard to actually get a response from them for those reasons. It's understandable, they're not even teaching that quarter and stuff like that. So it's an issue we have ran into.
Okay. Trevor?
With the DE, I found that most faculty, because I'll try to get out the notification that, look, this system went down, and I think faculty are accommodating, but it's interesting because, again, our late work policies are individual, an instructor has their own, they're allowed to do their own policy, but it would be interesting because I know the state was working on kind of an emergency plan in regards, it was kind of after the Santa Rosa fires and all the fires around the state. They had a work group that out of the chancellor's office that was working on kind of what's the emergency plan, and so that would be something I don't know as the DE committee, here on campus, we could try to create some maybe more of a policy so that it is that at least that's consistent. Again, late work is the individual faculty and that type of thing. However, if it's really and a lot of faculty have policies clearly stated in their syllabi, and I do want to emphasize all of you who teach distance ed, or anything, always your syllabi to present clear expectations, what your policy is. Again, all of us have that too. That's our policy, and again, there's different exceptions. It's individual acceptance of different things, but when you have your policy, it protects you. It protects your students to understand fully what the expectation is. And some faculty say, hey, if your internet goes down, that's not an excuse. You go to Starbucks. They kind of say, get in there and find a place to do this. And it a lot of times has to do with kind of students waiting till late, right before the due dates are due, and then they have a problem. And so some faculty, stress that that's really not an excuse. However, I think if we know when there's something that's more, I don't want to say catastrophic, but a larger issue that we then say, for these issues, yes, you need to. Because again, if campus is down, but again, I found most faculty reasonable with that I sent out notifications, I let them know. But if anybody has any suggestions or how they feel about that, that'd be good to hear.
I think some kind of catastrophic policy. And this wouldn't be an AP or board policy or anything, but maybe we could have a sheet and kind of go around to some faculty and just talk about this. Because I feel like if we just clarify with ISP, a lockdown we can't punish a student for that. That's outside the student's control. So we could detail that. We could detail situations of work or a distribution issue with the mail. And then there have been scenarios where maybe if an ed coordinator is leaving or something happens with their job, then the work doesn't get to the student again. The student shouldn't be punished. All those things I just described could be documented. Likewise, Trevor mentioned this. I think it was in the Bay Area, like a whole cable got cut. And that was something, obviously, if you're teaching, how could you expect students to submit stuff? You can't even grade stuff. So I think we could probably make a list, and then face-to-face would be, like you said, the fire, snow closures. I had a situation in the past, it was back, who was president? I think it was Guy, because certain presidents are more conservative about snow days. And I just remember it was like one of the worst days, and I was, I think, at the time living at the Y, and I could barely get to campus. I drove in that morning thinking we're going to be closed. It was a final exam day, and we weren't, but I said to everyone in class, I said, I just want to let you know if we don't get 100% of students here, I'm going to offer makeup if you guys want to take advantage of that, But 100% of the students showed up. There are even situations like that where I'm like driving, like in town, and I barely feel like I'm able to make it to campus. So, like Trev was saying, that's kind of, sometimes it's case by case. Certain faculty are more lenient, less lenient, but I feel like if we maybe had a master sheet of scenarios, and we're not going to hold people to it, but we would just say, could we agree to this as a faculty, maybe we could go through the Senate, just as a best practices, and we could work with the ISP office and say, because I think we have a sense of the main ones, but maybe there will be some new ones. Or with DE, we're developing a lot of test piloting some new apps and some new, as they call them, bells and whistles, which are great through the grant. You never know, maybe you install something like that and there's an outage, or things could happen with technology, and I think the key is, if it's system-wide, if it's global, as you said, the word catastrophic, then we could just communicate to the faculty that, we really encourage you to be fair to students because it's outside their control. If your personal Wi-Fi goes down, it's like anything else. I'll tell students, like if I have a paper due for a conference or a grant application or something, like I'm under the same timelines, and I don't wait till an hour before that grant is due to submit it. I try to get it a week ahead of time, which is hard. I think we're all a little bit maybe procrastinators, but that kind of thing is totally controllable.
The time where we didn't send things electronically so much, but you printed everything. All of a sudden, inevitably, your print cartridge was. You had to plan for things. You had to be ready. I mean, you couldn't just say, "Hey, I can't turn this in because I couldn't print." I wasn't able to print it. You found a way. You went to the college library. You found a way to do it. So that I think kind of falls under that. Just the planning on the individual's part. But in saying that, just so I can always put in the plug for those of you teaching face-to-face, even some of our ISP instructors who have been Canvas trained, there's one individual that just really likes the gradebook for Canvas instead of having to create a spreadsheet. So those of you teaching face-to-face, I really do encourage you to contact me regarding getting, Canvas certification. You get a training stipend of $250. But we are just really finding that students really appreciate having some type of access to their course in regards, even if it's just your syllabus presented in the course, and using the gradebook. And so there's some different features with that, where even if you have students turn in work in class, you don't have them do it electronically, you can still set up the assignment so that it has a paper submission, and then you just really utilize it more like an Excel spreadsheet. It just creates the columns and the cell, and then you can input the information, the grade, and then maybe you might find it useful to at least provide comments. So when students have turned in a paper and maybe you're going to discuss it the next class session, you can provide them feedback to be ready to prepare for a discussion that's going to take place in class. So just please remember that the Canvas learning management system, yes, people think it's mostly just for online, but however, no, it's a learning management system that can web enhance your course. You can cut back on your handouts and turning papers of people or handouts when students have been absent and they come to you and they always ask, did I miss anything important? However, the handouts, you're not taking that big stack to class each week to make sure they get it. You just say, oh, look at Canvas. look at Canvas. And so again, I just wanted to put that plug in there to encourage you to start to use some of these technologies for yourself. It helps you in your job, and then it also students really appreciate it.
That's really important. We're using, I know, between me and Sarah Marquez teaching the Promise classes recently in this first year, I do all the assignments on there because it actually saves time in class. It is a less carbon footprint. There still is, of course, I know with Bitcoin, there's this whole discussion of how much energy it takes to do all that, like cyber currency, but there is obviously some carbon impact of DE teaching and electricity and so forth. But I think not having to bring in stacks of handouts, you save time, and it's also introducing. And I mentioned in our OEI planning meeting yesterday, like let's introduce students the minute they step through the door and they start in the Promise program. They get to understand Canvas, and then the second class they take that's DE, guess what? They know everything, not everything, but they're very familiar with Canvas. And then I was thinking if we ever do get like Chromebooks for ISP students, it would be so easy to make a local Canvas shell. It wouldn't maybe connect to the internet. You could do links. You could maybe have links that only be downloaded and only sit on that Chromebook, but it would be so great and then if those students upon release and they come to the college or take a class with us, then they're familiar with how to use Canvas as well.
Right, and actually Shane had just shared with me, Canvas had sent him a facility in Washington State. And they have a closed system, and basically they have Chromebooks that they dock into their system, and it just basically downloads everything to the computer. Okay. And then they're able to even take the computer then back to their cell to do the work. But it's definitely it's where they're like I said, there is a closed system. They almost download that into the course, so it's just on the computer. So there's no internet. So they're doing great things. I know Shane's really working on some cool stuff, and so that would be ultimately. We know by just the packets going back and forth talking about.
Think about
the logistics and the amount of paper
that
save
with postage.
Yeah, if something like that could happen. But it's other people are doing it. They're being innovative. They're seeing that what technology. And then what a great experience for those individuals that they're working on computers, feeling comfortable with computers, understanding you have to type things if they're going to continue on and upon release continue their education or join the workforce. Then the world is computer driven and just being able to type things and do that. So that's exciting stuff. So hopefully, I know we're moving forward on things. And
I think it'd be awesome because that mail and the paper. It's crazy. And the other thing I like your point just about using in each of these modalities, if students become more information literate. When Melanie came in, our library director Melanie Chu, when she came in and did the workshops for students, she spent 2 hours taking students through different sources, and the topic was the big Pacific garbage patch. And so she showed them an academic or a journal article. She showed them a blog post. She showed them a kind of Time magazine article, and it was really great just to see students learning about information competency and technology and how to search online. And I feel like we should be doing those in all those modalities because we don't want our ISP students upon release, upon rehabilitation, to get to a college or they're taking a bunch of DE and all of a sudden they're like, wait a second, I never learned this technology. And I would hope that there's some computer use in the institutions. I realize the whole point is people hacking, but I hope there's a way that you can strip a computer down just to so it has no external interface with the world, because it's just such a vital skill for students to know, regardless of the method they're
they had a YouTube video from the Washington, and I could share that from the institute, the facility in Washington, and they showed, one of the students, just showed his Chromebook. It had the kind of like their televisions and had the bottom with the clear glass, or the plexiglass, or whatever that was, so that you can see that nothing's been changed or altered, and that kind of thing. And again, it didn't actually connect to the internet because everything was just from their system downloaded onto a local machine. So then they could go ahead and utilize that to facilitate the process of receiving content and video lecture from there, that type of thing. Then you can include all of that in your Canvas site, the teaching, your short videos, and then again the student then when they're taking their tests and or completing homework gets done via Canvas. And so then they go dock it back in, it gets uploaded, so then it gets pushed out to the instructor for grading, and then it just, it's a system. So somebody's doing it. So
that's awesome. Wow.
The capabilities are there.
I would love for us to have something like that. I'm sure you guys would too.
Yeah.
That sounds like it'd be very helpful for that.
Yeah.
Just again, it's that talking about the different systems. I mean, what's this?
For example, like there was a Spanish instructor that they forgot to include like an assignment in one of their modules, so we had to print out like that sheet for every student and send it. And also the issue with that was it was for a module that was the due date was next week. So if you didn't think of the issue of us having to send that paper, it get to them receiving that, then doing the assignment, sending it back to us. So that's already creating a delay.
The mail delay.
Yeah. And a workload issue for now. The ISP office has so many. They have so many people that are there working. They have, I'm sure, very tight timelines. They've got their schedule kind of worked out, and then all of a sudden, like all of us, you have to be ready for that. But it does. Then it causes that.
And their budget too.
Yeah,
for paper and mail and postage.
Yes.
So the other thing I was going to mention is we're talking about. I don't know if what'll happen, but Trevor's been involved in it. You mentioned Canvas enhancement. I personally would like to see. I don't know if we'll ever require it, but I would like to see just something out there that says we want all faculty to have a Canvas enhanced class if it's face-to-face. And maybe the first time you do it, it's the syllabus, and that's it, right? It doesn't have to be, but maybe the second quarter you teach, you add your handouts, you get your PDFs or whatever in there, so you save on some of that paper in class. But I think if we're all doing that, and again, ISP would be the one that we would need a big, we would need this system like in Michigan State. But we could do it, obviously DE, we have to use it for face-to-face. So easy to do. I think they just complete the training with you, they get that $250, and then they're introducing their students to this new world that they're going to encounter maybe for the first time if they haven't taken DE. And then they're also learning, so down the road, we've had departments, some of which ones, but you used to always rely on teaching face-to-face, and over time, less and less. And I've had those too. Some of my classes my race class is a great example. I'm doing it this quarter. The last 2 times I've taught it, it's had between 22 and 30 students. If I offer that face-to-face, we're talking, it's one of those 5, 6, and I'm in the hallways asking students to sign up. It would rarely get to 10, it would get canceled. So we've all kind of dealt with that situation, and I've been someone teaching in DE. I like it, I'm comfortable with it. But for someone who's new as a faculty member to DE, never has taught it, and you do that web enhancement, you get Canvas training, you're not going to know the whole system, you maybe don't use discussions, but I feel like that's a great way to give someone that intro, both a student and a faculty member. And then emergency happens, they have to teach a DE class, or something happens with an
situations
instructor.
where there has been a snow day or something like that, and you're able then to post some other materials online for your students to gain access to. And the other part of this, just so we are in discussions on how we could make life, some of the tasks that we complete here. We are discussing that there are some ways that you can integrate Canvas with Colleague, and so grades would be submitted via via Canvas. And so now we currently use Gradebook, to submit final grades. However, if you had a Canvas shell that you were creating, you could then, and again, that would take everybody having a Canvas shell. So, those discussions are out there, and it can be beneficial, to the faculty, where you're just kind of at the end of the quarter, your grades are ready. There's a way in the Canvas gradebook to overwrite grades. So maybe when that student has the 89.4, you want to give them the A because they that effort or whatever might have been constitutes that grade. Then you can override the B to the A. There's some stuff with Canvas that they've improved. And so maybe that integration with our systems here on campus would be something that can become available to us. Even student learning outcomes, there's a lot of great things with outcomes that we just haven't utilized again. Mark Williams is currently exploring that, where you can actually have a specific assignment or even a question on a quiz that is the student learning outcome assessment. So there's lots of good things out there, and again, it's just a little bit scary of having to learn a new thing, but once you create your Canvas site, you just copy it into the next quarter and update things. It can become where it really helps your workflow, and having to submit reprographics, requests to get those big stacks of reprographics. If any of you are interested, I know that Sue Kloss here, one of our biology instructors, I call her one of my champions for web enhancing, and it has, she'll talk about that. It's really changed things for her, and she posts things, and it's saved, and she progressed.
Yeah.
Turning in assignments in paper. Now some things are electronic. So again, just kind of getting your feet wet with it and just putting your toe in the water. It doesn't have to be everything. It can just be a small element of the course. Again, if it's just the syllabus, then you can, and then keep adding to it. As we all try to do with our courses to make changes and improvements.
Right.
It's the same thing with the Canvas site.
Yep. No, that's great. And again, I feel like if we're both as faculty and students, getting exposed to Canvas early, like we're doing with the Promise program, and then maybe with the Web Enhanced or Canvas Enhanced face-to-face, we then have less work to do, maybe at the training end, or it's going to increase student success. Because for some students, the first time, I still like on my race class, I was looking at my roster, and I'm like, wow, when you look at the inactive students, and it's about 5 or 6. So. And I don't follow up. We don't have a way, or I can create it, but I don't, contact those students and say, hey, why did you leave the class? Was it too hard for you? Was it something about Canvas that you didn't like? Was it something related to your life? But I still feel like there's, significant drop off that happens in a DE class, and maybe it's anecdotal, but maybe some of that is the technology. And again, we're talking about now. Trevor and I, through the CDC OEI grant, are talking about student guides, and I think it's wonderful. My concern is always, if something's optional. Now, again, for Promise, we could require it and say, you will watch the student guide, and we'll quiz you, or we'll track your time you spend on it. But for our everyday student who maybe will not just on their own watch a really good Canvas student guide, and then they take their first online class and they're kind of lost, and maybe their instructor is a little new to it or isn't that familiar with the features, it does present like a learning curve, and I worry about that because we shouldn't assume that we sometimes say particularly young students, they're so technological. Not necessarily. I've met some young students that are just 18-year-old students who just cannot handle things in Canvas, and maybe they have a smartphone, maybe not. I mean, you never know. Logan, one of our new English faculty, has come to the last 2 of these talks. And we had a conversation last week about social media and technology. And he's like, I've taught at UNR, and so many of the students there don't have a phone. I'm like, well, why? Can they not afford it? He's like, no, what happens is they're talking on the phone, they drop it on the concrete or the pavement, and it's broken, and they don't have money to fix it. So we were saying, you can't assume that students, because with OER, with Open Educational Resources and Zero Textbook, and for that, you could go to a website. But, I think sometimes we assume that every single student who enrolls, if they're young in an online class, either has access to technology or is super savvy. And I think it's not always the case. And that's why I think the student guide that we're doing through the grant is really important, because any of those hurdles we can reduce up front with the technology, then they can just focus on the learning, and faculty can just focus on the teaching, So I think it's great if we could do more Canvas, enhancement throughout the spectrum, including ISP someday, maybe. So we have about 4 minutes left. We'll try to keep track of time. So we've had, I think, some good conversations, and I want to make this just kind of as a global list, and if we do another one of these workshops. But the one takeaway I really want to pursue, some kind of informal, I'm not calling it a policy list, but a list of recommendations for the various modalities that if something comes up and it's outside the student's control, we would ask you to at least consider it. Again, we can never tell you because of academic freedom you have to, but hopefully if there's a lockdown and you have an ISP class, you will extend, once you get the verification from the office, you'll extend that to the students and say, okay, I'll definitely give you a makeup. Now, the scenario we talked about, if it's, the final exam and the faculty member is gone, then I think what has to happen, probably through the administration, through the dean, department chairs, and the ISP staff, is to say, okay, this instructor said they're going to give that student the makeup or the class, but because of their schedule, we maybe have to figure out a way of hiring someone else. It's kind of tricky though, because it's just to pay a person for grading the exams. I know that happened maybe
There was
with
a
the business
situation,
class.
it was in business, and it was a summer session, and the department kind of then decided what the kind of policy would be for the department, and had one, there was a full timer that was able to step in.
Yeah.
But every department doesn't have full time presidents that can do that. But it was, it was resolved, and it was something that people felt was equitable, and it was appropriate, and went ahead and it worked through it. But yes, that could be an option.
So Trevor, do you think that'd be something that, like a list like this, do you think the Senate would be interested just in hearing this, or anything?
Would it come from? I mean, wouldn't that be something that the Senate, the Senate would be most appropriate?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. And again, it's not really a policy.
It's not a policy.
It's just a list.
I think, like you said, best practice.
Yeah.
I mean, we've adopted, the CCOEI rubric, it's a policy in the sense that yes, that's our standard of quality, but we also have just recommending, I'm going to say, best practice of the way that the faculty choose to conduct business. So I mean, I think it would just be, and again, as a faculty member, it is kind of nice sometimes to have that, to know that I'm not really, they don't know, sometimes faculty and adjuncts don't always know what is the standard practice. It's not that they just want to go with what everyone else is doing, but they also don't want to be the only one not doing something. And so it would, I think, give that sense that everybody's informed of how we could kind of address these issues, and so you don't feel as if so many times as an adjunct you do something, we're trying to get away from that, of feeling so isolated or that kind of thing, but you hopefully would feel the support of the academic senate, and I think that would be helpful for all faculty.
Well, I'll start working on that. We can bring it through the Senate, so we'll kind of distribute around. I do want to connect with ISP staff and maybe some of the faculty and talk about some of the scenarios. So we'll call it quits for today. Thank you to Miguel, Trevor, those of you watching online. I believe there were 2 before. There's still 2 of you. Thank you for participating. 1, thank you for being online. We are going dark a little bit. I have 2 conferences coming up, but Teaching Doc 12 will be posted online. You can just watch it, basically. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that live. And then the next one is March 3rd, and that'll be focused on guided pathways. So same time and place and online location. So, all right, thank you all.
Thanks.